Praise the Lord and welcome to our program tonight. My goodness, we have a doozy, and I praise God for the guest here we have tonight. Very distinguished indeed. Is this Jesus or Muhammad? Is it Jihad Watch? I'll tell you, it's a combination of those and much, much more. As a matter of fact, we have a supernatural visitor, not unlike the one that Muhammad had in that cave in Mount Hira years ago, but someone far more noble, far better. But before we get to him, we're going to get to someone who I'm so thankful to meet and have on the program tonight, our dear brother, Robert Spencer.
Thank you very much, Pastor Joseph. And I, too, am very grateful to be here, very happy to be here for this very special program. This program is unlike any other you have ever seen,
Amen.
I guarantee it. For we have in the studio with us tonight a guest so special that I can guarantee you that he has not appeared live on television since at least 1799. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight, giving his first press conference of the 21st century, a true president, an American patriot, a lover of freedom, and someone who is here for a very important reason tonight, which will very soon become clear. And so let's give a big welcome to President George Washington.
Hey, praise the Lord. President Washington, indeed it's an honor. What is it, what occasion brings you here to our century?
It's Virginians, not virgins. Virginians, not virgins.
Well, what in the world
Enough said.
What in the world could President Washington be referring to, Brother Spencer?
Well, Pastor, you know, I think that, Mr. President, if I may, I think that he might be expressing a little bit of, and I think it has to be admitted, quite justifiable irritation over a piece that recently appeared in the peerless leftist online publication known as the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post is a leader in the leftist Islamic supremacist alliance and frequently publishes apologetics speaking with warm, positive tones about Islam, about jihad, about Islam's mistreatment of women, institutionalized discrimination against women and non-Muslims, and so on. But the Huffington Post this past week has outdone itself, and that is why our illustrious visitor has come to us from the 18th century. It appears that the Huffington Post has actually gone on record likening George Washington to Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Now, this may seem to be absurd on its face, but it was put forward quite seriously by a gentleman writing at the Huffington Post and actually arguing that the two were very similar. This so incensed the nation's first president that he decided to come to our studios tonight in order to set the record straight. And so, actually, I'd like to take it to you, Mr. President. The first thing I'd like to ask you is, at what age were you when you married Martha Washington? Or actually, more precisely, at what age was she? Was she 9 years old? Or 6 when you made the engagement and 9 when the marriage was consummated?
Actually, Martha Custis was 27 years old when I married her, and I was 27 as well. So, in what fifth dimension of HuffPo hell am I anything like Muhammad, who had sex with a 9-year-old girl? I leave that to the nation.
Well, we find that not only did this cause President Washington to turn over in his grave, but to appear here to vindicate himself, no less, under these scandalous claims and ridiculous comparison. But of course, before we go any further, because of our audience, some following your excellent blog, Jihad Watch, and others perhaps a bit clueless as to what we're talking about, as you just pointed out. Brother Robert, what indeed is the idea? I mean, obviously, the liberal, the leftists, they have an agenda, but could you just briefly speak a bit more? Why would they produce such an article as a time like this?
This is a very important question, Pastor, and I think that it's very important also that we discuss it before we get into the specifics of exactly what they're claiming the comparison is. The overall purpose of publishing the article was, above all, to whitewash Muhammad, in a word, to give people the impression that Muhammad was a benign leader, a wise leader, indeed a statesman of sorts, and that the nearest analogy to him would be the founding figure of the American Republic. This is, of course, coming after a great deal has come out about Muhammad. I wrote a book, of course, The Truth About Muhammad, and there are other books that are available about Muhammad, the Sirat Rasulullah, the Life of Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq, the Prophet Muhammad's first biographer in the 8th century, is readily available in English. And so people are more and more informed about just what this man was all about. And it's very clear that contrary to the claim of the non-Muslim Islamic apologist Karen Armstrong, that Muhammad was essentially a figure like Gandhi. Muhammad was actually somebody who waged wars and who, as we have already noted, married a child. The problem with all this is that Muhammad is exemplary. Chapter 33, verse 21 of the Quran says that Muhammad is uswa hasana, the excellent example. And in Islamic theology, that is understood in a maximalist way. If Muhammad did it, it's right, and it is to be emulated. And so if the Huffington Post is now positing that Muhammad was a completely benign figure, and that he was indeed a statesman on the stature of George Washington, then what they are trying to do is make American non-Muslims less concerned about the prospect of an increasing number of Muslims in this country coming here and thinking about Muhammad as the excellent example. If he's a completely benign example, then there's no problem. If indeed he's a warlord and a pedophile and all these other things, then that's a very different kettle of fish, and that's why the president is with us tonight, to set that record straight.
Excellent, Brother Robert. Well, before I give it back to you, we did start out with the marital record of the two, and of course, it sounds like that being that Muhammad is in fact an exemplar to all mankind, that George Washington, unfortunately, if you're a Muslim, falls far short, having a monogamous relationship, waiting until he's 27 years old to be married. And how does that match up with Muhammad?
Well, this is a very important point, that George Washington actually was not a religious figure at all. He did not start a religion. He did not act in the name of God. And he was instrumental in the founding of a republic that I believe carries the secret of a harmonious society in a situation in which people of conscience differ on fundamental ideas of what is the basic truth. That instead of one group trying to gain hegemony over another, instead of one religion trying to impose its will upon people who are not members of that religion, as we see with people who follow the religion of Muhammad every day around the world, George Washington was instrumental in founding the American Republic, which is based on the idea that there is no established religion, that this is not a recipe for the anti-religious initiatives that have been increasingly common over the last few years. Properly understood, it is a very wise provision that enables people who differ fundamentally on their basic views of life and of the priorities of life to respect one another and to live together in mutual harmony. Muhammad would have disagreed with that quite vehemently and would have said that it was an outrage before God to claim that people who were not Muslims and people who were Muslims should live together as equals on an indefinite basis without the Muslims gaining hegemony over the other and making sure that the non-Muslims felt themselves subdued, so that they would every day be reminded of their renegade status as people who had rejected the alleged truths of Muhammad and Islam. And so George Washington would have been completely unacceptable to Muhammad as an exemplar. And I wonder if the president himself would like to comment on that further.
Well, how would you guys like to be compared to Muhammad? I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine how I feel right now? Out of everyone in history they could compare me to, oh, you're like Muhammad, right? I mean, look, if you said I was like Benedict Arnold, I would, oh, but let's be clear here. Let's be clear here. I would not compare Muhammad to Benedict Arnold because it would be too great an insult to Benedict Arnold, all right? We have to be honest here. Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl. We talked about that. Muhammad had more wives than his own revelations allowed. He told his followers, you get 4, I get more. He had at least 9 at one time. Muhammad married the divorced wife of his own adopted son. Not the sort of man I'd like to be compared with. Muhammad's first impression of his revelations was that they were demonic in origin. He became suicidal and tried to hurl himself off a cliff. Muhammad was a victim, according to your Muslim sources, of black magic that gave him delusional thoughts and false beliefs. Now, does the Huffington Post really expect its readers to believe that as I'm crossing the Delaware, I start flopping around on the ground because I think I'm demon-possessed, and I try to jump into the water because I want to kill myself, and then when I snap out of it, I say, oh, a witch cast a spell on me. Do you really expect people to believe that? No. Well, quit comparing me to Muhammad.
Mr. President, if I may, Mr. President, I think that in the spirit of fairness, because we, after all, as Christians and in the United States of America, we represent the principles of free inquiry and rational discussion that Islamic supremacists so vehemently reject and their leftist allies insidiously and increasingly reject. And so I think we should give the gentleman his due, the man who wrote this piece, Craig Considine, who identifies himself as a PhD candidate at Trinity College, Dublin. Let's hope he's not a PhD candidate in either Islam or American history. But in any case, Considine says that in 7th century Arabia, a middle-aged man had a vision to create a new religious and social order for a largely pagan and tribal society. The man Muhammad told his band of followers to behave wisely and civilly. The best among you, he said, are those who have the best manners and character. I wonder if you have any comment on that as something that you would agree with as the author of The Rules of Civility, which is a superb book for teaching a quality of civilization and of gentlemanliness that has largely gone out of the American body politic in our own day. But what do you think of Muhammad as a model of civility?
Well, one of the biggest problems I see is how terms are used differently. A term can be used in the Muslim sources like character or morals or something like that. And we turn and use them in Western society, and people think that the Muslim means the same thing as we do in the West, using the same term, fighting, killing, something like that. Well, we mean the same thing. And we find that it's not. So yes, you can quote Muhammad saying all kinds of things that we would agree with. Dig a little deeper and see exactly what he meant by this. So just for instance, on the issue of, let's say, fighting. Right? So I'm a great fighter.
I mean, after all, Mr. President, you shed quite a lot of blood, just like Muhammad.
I
mean, there
shed
is
so much
something,
British blood, it wasn't even funny.
Did you slay the British wherever you found them?
No, we didn't.
Now, that is a
But
difference.
we did slay some British. We did slay some
Arrest
British.
them, besiege them, lie in ambush everywhere for them?
Well, not quite.
Until they repented and paid the poor due?
No, until they left us alone and let us have our own country.
I see.
All right, so
not a good
let's
Muslim.
compare this with Muhammad, because many Muslims would claim that that's exactly what Muhammad did, right? That's exactly what he did. He fought in self-defense, blah, blah, blah. So if we look at the actual pattern laid down in the Muslim sources, we find that there are 3 stages, and I wish that the Huffington Post would get their minds around these stages and they'd quit helping with stage 1. Stage 1 is what Robert Spencer would call stealth jihad. When Muslims are outnumbered, they are taught to promote a message of peace and tolerance. This is the exact same pattern we find in the life of Muhammad. It's the pattern laid down in the Quran. It's the pattern laid down in the Hadith. It's the pattern followed by Muslims for the past 14 centuries. When Muslims are outnumbered, making up a percentage or 2 of the population, they promote peace and tolerance. Organizations like CARE over in the United States, where Muslims make up approximately 1% of the population, what's the message? Islam is peace and tolerance, right? All right. That's the pattern that Muhammad followed when he was a persecuted prophet in Mecca, had very few followers. That's not the final message. That's not the final message. Later, Muhammad had enough followers, he had enough supporters, he had enough alliances to wage what we would call, stage 2, defensive jihad. Defensive jihad is a form of defense. If the Muslim community is attacked, if the Muslim community is persecuted, Muslims are allowed to defend themselves. Should point out that the Muslims have a much broader view of what constitutes an attack against Islam. Can include criticizing Muhammad, can include making fun of Muhammad's revelations, and so on. But during this stage, Muslims act in self-defense against some perceived attack on their religion or on their prophet. The retaliation can be terrorism, can be going out marching an army, can be all kinds of things. Later, and we say later because it's very important to keep in mind that stage 2, that self-defense stage, that defensive jihad stage, is not the final revelation of the Quran. The final revelations of the Quran come in Surah 9, and that's when Muslims are commanded to engage in stage 3, namely offensive jihad, when Muslims are able to violently subjugate a population they are commanded to do so. And we read this in Surah 9, verse 29, which specifically commands Muslims to fight and violently subjugate specifically Christians and Jews until we feel ourselves subdued and we pay the jizya. So the society envisioned by Muhammad is one that ultimately ends with Muslims on top, everyone else on bottom. And it shouldn't be surprising because according to the Quran, Surah 3, verse 110, Muslims are the best of peoples. Well, Muslims are the best. Who are the worst? Surah 98, verse 6, Christians and Jews and other, lumps us together with the polytheists, are the worst of creatures. We're lower than pigs. We're lower than rats. That's the ultimate goal of Islamic society. But that's when Muslims can do it. When they can't do that, they're told to use different methods. And what's so amazing is that you have the Huffington Post itself saying, how can we help you with that stage one goal of keeping people ignorant about Islam and keeping people thinking that it's peaceful and tolerant? Like George Washington.
I must say, Mr. President, I am amazed at your knowledge of the Quran and the Hadith.
Well, don't all our presidents know all of this?
Certainly, certainly. You were.
Well, we know Jefferson, of course.
It was a requirement in my time.
He celebrated.
It was a requirement in my time to understand.
I think it's worth emphasizing also that all these things that you were sketching out about the three stages of jihad, and the final one being offensive warfare for the subjugation of non-Muslims under the rule of Islamic law, that's civility as far as Muslims are concerned. That's justice. And so it's not as if what Craig Considine in the Huffington Post is saying is something that Muslims would deny. They would say, yes, of course, Muhammad told us to be civil. But they hold that at the very same time that they hold these ideas of warfare against and the subjugation of unbelievers.
Completely different definitions of the similar terms.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, you pointed out this second period, and I wonder, of course, we know from Islamic history, Brother Robert, that Muhammad gained his strength by the razzias, the raids on the Quraysh tribes, stealing, looting, raiding, pillaging. Certainly, my history hasn't informed me of a similar way of George Washington calling up the Continental Army, but we find that Muhammad, of course, how in fact did he gain power? Was it through a declaration of independence from the Quraysh? Was it through legislative action, perhaps? Was it through many entreaties to the Quraysh tribal leaders? Certainly not. This, of course, is analogous to what George Washington and the American revolutionaries did, but it's a completely different, diametrically opposed way of gaining power.
Yes. Obviously, they both did fight wars. Obviously, they both gained political power as a result of those wars, although Washington was an elected official and Muhammad was a warlord who gained power solely by force of might. At the same time, however, the spirit of the way in which they fought was so different. And George Washington fought at a time before the Geneva Convention, but he still fought according to the rules of warfare that were generally recognized by civilized nations at the time. Take, for example, this from the life of Muhammad. Some people from the Uraina tribe came to Medina, and its climate did not suit them. So Allah's apostle, that is Muhammad, of course, allowed them to go to the herd of camels given as zakat. And they drank their milk and urine as medicine. But they killed the shepherd and drove away all the camels. So, what would George Washington have done? Ask yourself if you think George Washington would have reacted in this way. Allah's apostle sent men in their pursuit to catch them, and they were brought, and he had their hands and feet cut, and their eyes branded with heated pieces of iron. And they were left in the Hara, a stony place at Medina, biting the stones. Another hadith has it that Muhammad denied them food and water despite their begging for water in the desert where they were unable to move, of course, because their hands and feet had been cut off. And so imagine, Mr. President, did you ever behave this way toward the British during the American Revolution?
No, I didn't, but I actually caught two issues in there. One, you could burn people's eyes out with hot nails and stuff, leave them out in the sun. You could do all sorts of horrible, violent things. And of course, there are far more stories than this in the Muslim sources. Torturing Kanena for money. He knew where some money was hidden. We're going to hold him down. We're going to light a fire on his chest until he tells us all kinds of that. But the drinking of camel urine.
That's medicine.
I just can't get past that
Mr.
because
President, did you drink camel urine as medicine?
Specifically in this article, I was compared to Muhammad on the issue of personal hygiene. Right?
That's right. That's right.
Personal
Yes.
hygiene. You're comparing me on the issue of personal hygiene to a guy who's going around passing out camel urine as a drink.
Oh.
And this is sort of the capstone, because when you read the Muslim sources, you realize how disturbing this is. First of all, Muslims are allowed to have up to 4 wives, unless you're Muhammad, and then you get 9 or 11 or however many you want. But Muslims are also allowed to rape their female captives when they attack some other place. Now think about this. You're marching into town. Oh, she's hot. Let me have sex with her. You don't know what diseases she has. We're talking about personal hygiene, right? You don't know what kind of disease that woman had. And then you go back to your 4 wives, and guess what? Now they all have the disease. Now all the kids you produce have the disease. Lots of disease spread around. Is this good for personal hygiene? I say no. We read in the Muslim sources that Muslims went to Muhammad and they said, Muhammad, we need to do our washings, right? We need to do our ceremonial washings. And we have over here the well of Buddha. It's filled with human waste. People put their urine, their feces. Women put their used menstrual cloths in there. They throw dead animals in there. And they say to Muhammad, should we use this water? And he says, yes, water is not made impure by anything. So they're rubbing this all over their face. Is that the sort of hygiene that I would practice? So suppose you sit there, you rub this all over your body. You're not feeling good. You rub it all over your body, clean yourself up for dinner, let's say. Then a fly falls into your meal. What are you going to do? According to Muhammad, you have to dunk the fly in there, because even though one of its wings may have a disease like typhoid or something, the other wing has the cure for the disease. So a fly's over there crawling around on a pile of dog dew, and then lands in your food, and you're sitting there following Muhammad's advice, dunking it in your food. Well, then you get a stomach ache. You want to drink water. Muslims one day found a dead animal floating in water. They said, Muhammad, should we drink this? They said, yeah, water's not made impure by anything. Again, so now they're drinking this water. Muhammad, we know, according to Musnad Ahmad, used to suck on the tongues of other men. He used to suck on their tongues and their lips. Now think about this. You wash up with human feces and urine, right? Then you eat your meal. You're dipping the fly in there with typhoid on it, right? Then you're not feeling good. You get a stomach ache. Let me drink some water. Now you drink some water with a dead animal floating in it. Then you're sucking on the tongue of your buddy here. You're both sick now. And what's the cure when you feel really, really bad? Camel urine. Camel urine, ladies and gentlemen. This is the guy that the Huffington Post compares me to.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I must say I've enjoyed the last few minutes of that explanation. But you know, once again, trying to be fair, aren't these really peripheral issues? I mean, after all...
Peripheral? They're comparing me to Muhammad on hygiene, saying you should follow, and the article concludes by saying you should follow these practices. You should follow the example set by Muhammad. If you follow the example of Muhammad, you will die. You will die. You will literally get sick and die. The only reason Muslims are still with us is that they were smart enough not to keep washing themselves up with feces, not to keep drinking water from a pool with a dead animal floating in it. They were smarter than their prophet was, and that's why they're alive. So don't say I'm exaggerating here.
Brother Robert, you know, we have all of these claims, and you've talked about the agenda that's being put forward. The same agenda is on college campuses, you know, this idea. Some book was written, you're probably familiar with it, but this idea that, hey, you know, the American revolutionaries, they were jihadis. They were just as bad as the Islamic terrorists. And you're really, just as you say, a term that perhaps you've coined, you're just a greasy Islamophobe.
Yes, I did not actually coin that term. That term was actually applied to me by a very charming young Muslim lady, and who used to regularly hector me in emails, and she called me that, and I thought that was such a marvelous phrase that I have adopted it. And so if you're watching tonight, ma'am, I do want to thank you, and if you want royalties, just contact my office.
I pray thee, fine sir, that you would put forth some of your Zionist black arts and bring forth some kind of clarity to this discussion.
Well, Pastor, you know, I think that a little bit of explanation is in order. I actually am a sorcerer of a very high degree. For example...
did you cast a spell on Muhammad?
Yes.
Chance?
Yes,
no,
I did.
In the Ajami dates that day, you couldn't do it.
That's right, that's right. Khalil Muhammad is a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and if you're watching tonight, Dr. Muhammad, greetings.
Hey, give us a call, by the way.
Assalamu alaikum. Give us a call and abuse us all terribly. But I did want to say that Khalil Muhammad actually read my biography, The Truth About Muhammad, and he wrote me in hot anger and said, I cannot believe you are spreading such hate and lies about the Prophet, peace be upon him. You actually have claimed in this book that he married his daughter-in-law.
Well, he did.
Well, he did marry his daughter-in-law. It's in chapter 33, verse 37 of the Quran, referred to obliquely, filled out in the Hadith, that Muhammad saw Zainab, his daughter-in-law. He was overcome by her beauty. She was in a state of relative undress. His adopted son, actually offered to divorce her so that Muhammad could marry her. And Muhammad said, "Keep your wife and fear Allah." And then Allah actually rebuked him for having said that and for refusing what Allah wanted to give him, which was, of course, the hot babe. And so Zayd did divorce her. He came out of his trance, Muhammad, and said, "Who will go and tell Zainab the news that Allah has married her to me?" And then Aisha, one of his other wives, the famous child bride, said, I think rather tartly, "Allah is always in a hurry to grant you your desires." These things are all in the canonical Islamic texts that are considered reliable by Muslims. And the point is, however, that Dr. Khalil Muhammad of the University of California at San Diego actually expected people to believe, and of course he knows that most Americans are ignorant about Islam and would believe him, that I had fabricated this story and that it's not in the Quran, not in the Hadith, not in the biographies of Muhammad, that the earliest Muslims who wrote about Muhammad included in their biographies. He wanted to pretend that I had originated these things. And so this is what Pastor Joseph is referring to, that I by my Zionist black arts, I cast passages into the Quran, I cast passages into the biography of Muhammad that were never there. He was otherwise a model of civility, a model of humility, and as Considine in the Huffington Post says, he quotes Mahatma Gandhi, who should have known better, saying, "Muhammad was a treasure of wisdom, not only for Muslims, but for all mankind." And my colleague Pamela Geller in the American Freedom Defense Initiative very helpfully juxtaposed that quotation with another hadith about Muhammad containing some of the wisdom that he offered to all mankind, that whoever cleans his private parts with stones should do so with odd numbers of stones. And that is indeed wisdom that we can all take to heart and apply for the betterment of all mankind.
Thank you, Brother Robert.
That's good hygiene there. That's good hygiene there.
Well, 248-416-1300. This is a live program at ABN. Hey, you don't have this type of chance often to call into a program like this with these illustrious visitors.
A live program with a dead president. How could you top that?
I mean, washing private parts with stones, sucking on other people's tongues. I tell you what, we've got a lot to talk about. 248-416-1300. Give us a call back. Hey, Huffington Post, give us a call. Khalil Muhammad, give us a call. Hey, we're ready for you. We're live here at ABN. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Robert Spencer and George Washington. Praise the Lord, and welcome back to ABN. Here I am with Brother Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch and his famous blog, jihadwatch.org, the premier anti-jihad blog on the face of the planet. And I wish we had David Wood, who also has a wonderful blog, a great apologist. But unfortunately, Brother Robert, David couldn't make it tonight. However...
Who is this David Wood whereof you speak? Well, I've heard good things of him.
Well, indeed you should, dear sire. Yet I have to say that we are most thankful and honored at the resurrection, dare I say it, of our first president, George Washington. And the occasion of such was not just the turning over in your grave, but coming out of it at the slanderous accusations of the liberal media in the United States of America, Huffington Post, comparing you, dear sir, to that scoundrel Muhammad of the 7th century
Very
Arabia.
offensive, but I do have to say, has everyone noticed that I'm much more handsome in person than I am in my portraits?
Well, I didn't notice that particularly. But nevertheless, since I did call Muhammad a scoundrel, I do apologize for breaking your rules of civility. And I see that the Huffington Post pointed out...
There are exceptions for everything.
Well,
there are exceptions.
I doubt that you had the warmest feelings towards the Muslim Barbary pirates who were impressing our soldiers and enslaving them during the time of your...
That was the entire reason I wanted a navy.
Yeah,
Well, I believe actually, didn't you say that the Barbary pirates would hide behind trees and the trees would cry out and say, "Oh, American, there's a Barbary pirate hiding behind me. Come and kill him"?
No, don't remember that.
Except the tree of Garkad, because it's the tree of the
the
revolution.
tree of the Barbary.
In fact, I must say, if I had said that, If I had said that, I would have gone down in history as an intolerant, racist bigot.
Well,
if
you
I'd
are
said
white.
anything like that.
You
There
are
only
white,
certain people. There are
and
only
you're
certain people who
Christian,
can get away with saying things like that.
And you believe in the Bible. I mean, that's 3 strikes against you. White, Christian, Bible.
It's true.
You're in trouble in America. Now, you're okay.
I don't know if you can get elected these
1776.
days.
No, you got 3 strikes against you, brother. However,
People don't follow titles. They follow courage. My friend William Wallace said that.
it's all about change. Muhammad and Washington advised their peers to keep their mouths free of foul language. What a striking similarity. In the Holy Quran, offensive name-calling is forbidden. Like, for example, if you were to call a Jew a pig or a monkey, I mean, that's absolutely forbidden. There's
Yes.
no way.
Or the worst of creatures, right?
Absolutely not.
Or
that's not offensive.
the men that Allah has made in order to torture in hell forever. That He created them solely for that purpose, and they are like cattle.
Astaghfirullah.
Even more misled.
Astaghfirullah. We would never say something like that. You kafir.
Chapter 7, verse 179, they are like cattle.
Let not some men among you laugh at others. I apologize. I've been laughing the whole show. You too, Robert. We're not good Muslims.
No, very, very poor Muslims.
Let not some of you among others laugh at others. And then, of course, they break the quote, and then they come back, nor defame, nor be sarcastic to each other. Boy, we're not doing too good tonight. Nor call each other by offensive nicknames. Ill-seeming is a name connecting wickedness. Now, in Rules of Civility, we understand, President Washington, that you said something to the effect of, use no reproachful language against anyone, neither curse nor revile. And of course, that's exactly like the Quran, because there's never any cursing of unbelievers in the
Never.
Quran. No.
Never.
Or in the dua, in the prayers of Muslims, in mosques. They never, I mean, Surah Al-Fatiha, the first surah, it wouldn't call in the wrath of God against the Jews or perhaps against those who've gone astray. I mean, this is just
Guide us to the
ridiculous.
straight path, the path of those with whom you have guided, not the path of those who have earned your wrath, or the path of those who have gone astray. Of course, in traditional Islamic commentaries on the Quran, the path of those who have earned Allah's wrath is the Jews, and the path of those who have gone astray is the Christians. President Washington, I'm sure there's something in your background where you said, guide us to the straight path, not the path of the British, not the path of the French.
No, absolutely not.
And wasn't there something about, you mentioned virgins and Virginians, and isn't there something about the Virginians crying out, or you cursing, the angels cursing the Virginians all night long if they don't do something for you? I mean, isn't there something like that?
What's disturbing about this?
You're
is
not
people,
supposed to mock others.
Yes,
So
that's right.
people are laughing.
Yeah.
You've got people laughing.
We've got
and
a
they're
lot of
laughing,
callers. They're laughing
And
now.
they're laughing because you're attributing to me things that Muhammad did.
I pray you forgive me, sir.
And that's the purpose of the entire show, is to clear these things up.
I think
right?
Martha was 9, wasn't she?
No. I will say this. The ignorance of the Huffington Post author knows no bounds. Even, I mean, we have to wonder what is required reading, right? What is required reading for his PhD? Because if you do even the slightest, most cursory examination of the Muslim sources, you find out what the details were on this don't curse other people. If you look at the details of the passage he quoted, this has to do usually with your fellow Muslims.
Right.
And we even know, for instance, on the don't use nicknames people don't like. We know. Go to the commentary. Go to the commentary of Ibn Kathir and see what that means. This referred, the source of this revelation was Muhammad was calling some guy a nickname, and someone came up to him later and said, he really doesn't like that nickname. Bam! Revelation. Quit calling each other these nicknames and so on.
By the way, did you cite that in your manners of civility? Did you put a footnote to the Quran?
Well, if you read the opening of the article, it says 1,000 years later, I was following the example of Muhammad. I was following the example laid down
Did you
by
borrow
Muhammad.
Jefferson's Quran? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
That's a
loved it.
very good point,
Loved it.
because Barack Obama, your illustrious successor, has said many times that Islam is part of America's story, and that Muslims have made a difference in America throughout American history. So
they
could you
certainly
enlarge
have.
upon
They certainly have.
Muslims in the
That's
revolution?
why we have a
From
Navy
the-
today.
from
Why do
the
we have a
very
Navy?
beginning, right?
How's the song go?
From the halls of Montezuma. I can't do it without singing with Gomer Pyle's accent.
Zuma.
To the shores of Tripoli.
To the
You're making
shores,
fun again.
to the shores of Tripoli.
To the shores of
What's that
Tripoli.
mean?
That's an old song.
What's the shores of Tripoli mean?
Tripoli. Then, Benghazi, Tripoli, Libya, Gaddafi, Barack Hussein Obama. That's what it's about. That's what comes together in my mind.
Yes.
Libya. Well, now, how in the world did that? Now, wait a minute. Now, there's a conspiracy here. Black
is-
Zionist
I think so.
arts are afoot. Because we all know that the Muslims never lifted a finger against America until George Bush went to Iraq and started to spread our hate-filled, white supremacist, American exceptionalist war all over the world.
And
Muslims
then-
are peaceful people.
And then he got together with Robert Spencer and Dr. Emmett Brown to construct a time machine powered by 1.21 gigawatts of Islamophobia to go
right.
back in time and insert into the Quran that they need to go out and fight and subjugate people.
It's an
Black
extraordinarily potent
Zionists
force.
are sorcerer. Well, tell us about that.
I wanted to comment briefly on the language before we continue.
Because then I do want you to
because this is,
continue
I mean,
with
the article isn't very long, right? He
Yeah.
makes a few claims, a few
Yeah.
comparisons in
Yeah.
there. One of the comparisons is this issue of not insulting others. Now, according to the Quran, you're not supposed to insult your fellow Muslims, and so when it
Very
says
nice.
each other, the context there is Muslims. But also in the Muslim sources, it does say, don't mock the gods of the polytheists, lest they mock your God in return, right? So the origin behind this, if you look at the Muslim sources, is that early on, Muhammad and his followers were walking around constantly mocking the gods of the pagans in Mecca.
Yeah.
So he's calling, hey, let's not hurt each other, but you have these false gods and they're silly and blah, blah, blah. He's making fun of them. Right?
Don't ask, don't tell.
Eventually, the pagans of Mecca, who had some respect for Allah,
Yeah.
who had some respect for Allah.
Because,
as
of
part
course,
their
he was
pantheon.
the head of the pantheon of
he's
gods. Yeah.
But Muhammad knew this, so he knew he could get away with making fun of their gods that he
Yeah.
didn't believe in.
Right.
He got them to the point where they said, fine, we're going to start mocking Allah. That's how mad we are that you won't stop mocking our religion.
Yeah.
That's when Muhammad told his followers, now we don't mock their gods because they'll mock ours.
Was it
Notice
mocking
that
Allah
only-
or mocking Muhammad that he got under his
Well,
skin?
yeah. But specifically here, Allah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is it did not apply in situations where you weren't in a position to mock the God of Islam. Then all of a sudden bets were off because the only purpose for the revelation in the first place was don't mock Allah. What we have in the Muslim sources, Muhammad told his followers, if someone recites his genealogy to you in the manner of the former people. In other words, if someone is saying, I'm the son of so-and-so, who's the son of so-and-so, who's the son of so-and-so, I can't convert to Islam, I come from a long line of proud polytheists, right?
Yeah.
Muhammad said, if someone recites his genealogy in that way of his parents, tell him to bite his father's penis and don't use a euphemism.
Now, that's not in
Tell
It
him
is,
to bite
it
his
is.
father's penis and don't use a
Zionist
euphemism.
black art.
Tells
Yes,
his followers, don't use a euphemism. Don't water that down. This is what I'm commanding you to say. And it gets even worse when you see how his followers followed that example of using this derogatory, childish language of the polytheists. Abu Bakr, they were in a situation where Muhammad was going to attack Mecca. One of the Meccans went out and talked to him and actually tried to reason with him and gave him a good argument. He said, Muhammad, there are only two possibilities here. You're either going to win or you're going to lose. He said, if you lose coming after our city, you're going to lose and all your followers are going to leave you. You're going to have no power.
Right.
Or if you win, you're going to go down in history as a man who conquered his own people. What guy comes back and conquers his own people?
Yeah.
Either way you lose, don't do that. He's saying lose, lose. Abu Bakr, right there in the presence of Muhammad, said, go suck Allah's clitoris. How much more offensive and derogatory and insulting can you possibly get? This is an At-Tabari. This is an At-Tabari, right? Go suck Allah's clitoris. Allah was the goddess that this man and this
Abu
tribe
Bakr told
believed in.
Muhammad to do this.
Abu
No,
Bakr
no.
told the man who's sitting there,
Okay.
the polytheist. He told it to him in Muhammad's presence, right?
This is in At-Tabari.
Yes. He says, go suck Allah's clitoris. Now think about this. Muslims, if someone were to say this sort of thing to you, if someone were to say, oh, you believe in Muhammad, oh, go put your mouth on his penis, or go do something to your God, Allah. If someone were to say this, Muslims would say, it's so offensive, it's so horrible, it's so disgusting, you're such Islamophobes, you're such bigots. And this is how your prophet and his closest companion talk to people. Go bite so-and-so's penis. Go perform oral sex on your goddess.
Well,
This
actually,
is disgusting, childish behavior, and this is from the greatest example Islam has to offer.
A couple things about that. Mr. President actually Muslims write that kind of thing to me pretty much every day. And I publish many of them on Jihad Watch, but also some of the most absolutely fiendishly obscene ones I don't even publish because it's a family website.
Yeah,
but in any case, it has to be said that this, too, does not contradict the command for civility. Just as Muslims equate justice with the subjugation of women and the subjugation of non-Muslims, so also they would equate civility with this kind of obscene language directed toward unbelievers. It is civility as far as they're concerned, just as Islamic law is justice even when it institutionalizes those inequalities. That is the definition of it. They've emptied the words of their meanings, as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, and have invested them with meanings that are ultimately completely the opposite of what the words actually mean.
And if you think about how disturbing that this whole pattern is, right? Yeah. The Huffington Post writers, in general, are absolutely clueless when it comes to Islam, or they're deceptive in a few cases, but I think most of them are generally just clueless. They've absorbed a false narrative. They've never been to anything remotely resembling an authoritative Muslim source. They get all their information from care websites and things like that about Islam. And yet they have such a wide influence and such a wide readership, they become the megaphones for nonsense. Yeah. They become megaphones for stealth jihad, and they're I mean, just ridiculously silly people.
They echo Barack Hussein Obama. Dear brothers, we have now more than 6 callers, and we have much more to say, and certainly I'd like to hear personally, Mr. President, your encounter with Muslims. Most Americans don't understand or even recognize that that took place. I'd like to hear you speak more upon that, but with the permission of both of you, dear brothers, shall we take perhaps one caller now?
Absolutely. Let's take a bunch of callers.
All right, we've got a lot of callers, and I mean, my goodness, they're lining up to speak, not only to Robert Spencer, but of course to George Washington. I mean, you know, hey, we might have Barack Hussein ask for advice. Very unlikely. Nevertheless, let's take our first caller of the night right now. Welcome, you're on the air with ABN.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
I just wanted to say a few things. You know, Robert Spencer was, and you guys were mentioning Obama. Well, Obama is not a Muslim, but like other American radicals, groups like the ACLU, he will tolerate non-Judeo-Christian religions because he knows Christianity is what made America great. Now, Obama Sr. from Kenya is 7/8 Arab and 1/8 black. Because Barack is Arabic for Baraka, meaning blessed, Hussein is Arabic, and so is Obama. But the reason Obama is hiding his real... Well, Obama did attend Muslim school when he was living in Indonesia, but the reason he's hiding his birth certificate is because his real father is Frank Marshall Davis, a prominent member of Communist Party USA. A documentary you can watch on that is Dreams from My Real Father.
Well, this is all very interesting. And it may well be true. Unfortunately, if these things were readily established, then the political situation would be quite different from what it is. These things are, I think it's very important that ultimately we get to the bottom of Barack Obama's birth and all these questions that have swirled around these 4 years and more now. But ultimately, the question has to be asked. People wonder if Barack Obama is a Muslim. People wonder all these things. The main problem is not really so much what he believes in his heart of hearts. Mm-hmm. The main problem is how he is acting and how he is changing the United States of America in directions that are harmful to all of us and enabling, whether he's a believer in Islam or not, enabling the advance of pro-Sharia Islamic supremacism all across North Africa and the Middle East in ways that will have terrible consequences for the United States, for Israel, and for all free people in the future. These things we know. These things are not just matters of speculation. However well-founded the speculation may be, it's still speculation. But we know that Obama is taking us down a very dangerous path in enabling and appeasing Islamic supremacism. And that is what we should be focused upon in trying to marshal the resources of free people to resist.
Thank you, Brother Robert. Thank you, dear caller. And we're going to go to the next caller. Thank you very much. We have a lot more callers. Thank you so much for calling. And Brother Robert, before we get to the next caller, and you said this many times before, but this is a wonderful question for our viewers and our callers to think about. If Barack Hussein Obama were a Muslim, let's say he's not, and he were a Muslim, would he act any differently in his policy making?
I don't think there's any way in the slightest that he would be acting any differently. Now, this might seem to be an uncharitable answer to the question, Because after all, Barack Hussein Obama, he is responsible, as he himself will remind you very happily, for the deaths of Osama bin Laden and Anwar al-Awlaki. But at the same time, it has to be recalled that Barack Obama is enabling people with exactly the same goals as al-Awlaki and bin Laden. That it was really unavoidable and impossible to refuse to take out bin Laden and al-Awlaki. Excuse me, after so much resources, so much of American treasure had been expended, and so much American personnel devoted to these things for so many years, those guys had to be taken out. Right. But at the same time, their goal was to impose Islamic law over the world. And there are Muslim groups, notably the Muslim Brotherhood, working to achieve the same goal by different methods. And Barack Obama has done nothing but enable them, and done nothing domestically, but work to enable and aid the stealth jihad project, which is to advance the influence and the accommodations to the influence of and accommodations to Islamic law in the United States, even at the expense of American constitutional values. This is a program that is being put forth by the Council on American Islamic Relations and many others in pressing individual cases, discrete cases all across the country that establish and reinforce the principle that wherever Islamic law and American law conflict, it's American law that has to give way. The Obama Justice Department has aided in that effort again and again and again, most notably forcing a school district to pay $75,000 to a first-year math teacher who took 3 weeks off to go on the Hajj. Now, she was 29 years old. And if she had just waited and stayed at her job, the Hajj would have come in the summer break when she was 38. 38 is not too old to make the Hajj, and she could have waited. A Muslim only has to make it once in a lifetime. But instead, she insisted that the school give her 3 weeks off, a first-year teacher. Any of you out there who are teachers know how absurd this is. A first-year teacher getting 3 weeks off during the school year. She left the job. She was dismissed. She sued, and the Obama Justice Department got her reinstated and got her $75,000 settlement. This is the stealth jihad, the advance of Islamic supremacism, the advance of the idea that Islam must take precedence over American law and custom and practice wherever and whenever the two conflict. And Obama has been absolutely down the line with that goal. And so, in answer to your question, there isn't any difference.
The dimmification of the West, Barack Hussein Obama leading the charge.
Exactly.
Perhaps we'll take one more caller before
Yes,
we get
absolutely.
back to our president, George Washington. Let's take the next caller right now. Welcome, you're on the air with ABN.
Hey, I got a quick,
Go
actually, I
ahead.
got one quick statement and one quick question for Dave. One, I think when Mohammed did the tongue sucking, he did it to children too, if I remember right. And my question to Dave is, when he debated Ali Ate, or whatever you pronounce him, they always brought up Mohammed's worry that it was offensive more than defensive, but I never hear anybody rebut how offensive and justification for his offensive tactics, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I got the second one, I think. Did you get the first question? No. Would you repeat the first question again, please, quickly?
Oh, it wasn't really a question. It was Muhammad sucked the tongues of children as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. You're cutting out a little bit. I'm going to let not David, but President Washington respond.
Yes, I had mentioned earlier that Muhammad had this practice of sucking on people's tongues, and it was said that the tongues or the lips that Muhammad has sucked on will never taste the hellfire. So this was actually a method of salvation in Islam. Funny, I don't read about that in the Huffington Post.
No.
Don't read about that.
No.
Never read about that. Never read about
President
any of the
Washington,
interesting
did you
things.
practice this?
No. You know what would have happened to someone in my time? What would have happened to someone in my time going around sucking on other guys' tongues?
What would happen?
Wouldn't have been in the army very long. I'll tell you
The
that
don't
much.
ask,
I'll tell you
don't
that
tell rule was not enforced
I
then.
see.
Did you catch the part of this David Woods debate on Ali Ate?
Yeah, tell me about that David Wood. How'd that go?
Who is this David Wood character?
He likes it.
Well, he is famous, known as a timeless genius. So we know about him. He was asking something about offensive and defensive jihad.
Yeah, perhaps you could speak to that.
No, the caller.
Well, I think he was saying that what is the justification behind the offensive jihad that they cite as Muslims when they're always saying that it's defensive?
Well, and here's the thing, and this is brilliant, and really, you could not invent something this diabolically brilliant if you tried, as what you have in the Muslim sources. What you have is, in the Muslim sources, as I stated earlier, Muhammad, when he was a persecuted prophet in Mecca, promoted a message of peace and tolerance. There are Quranic revelations about peace and tolerance. Read Surah 109. To you be your religion, and to me be my religion. This is what Muslims are told to say to people if they disagree. And Muslims point to that today and say, you see, this is what Islam teaches. To you be your religion, and to me be my religion.
No
Peace, tolerance, love, love, love,
religion.
love, love, right?
Yeah.
Later on, you have, in Surah 22, for instance, different passages allowing Muslims to fight. But it's to fight against persecutors or to fight against people who are attacking them and so on. So the message changes. Before that, they weren't allowed to fight, not even in self-defense. Eventually, once Muslims had formed some alliances, the message changed to, now you can fight people who are attacking you or who are criticizing your religion. You can fight people for certain religions, but they have to do something to you first. They have to be doing something to you. Yeah. And why this is important is from a Muslim perspective.
All unbelievers.
No. From a Muslim perspective, did the United States do anything to deserve 9/11?
Of course.
Of course. Of course. If you go to Surah 533 of the Quran, and this is important because it comes right after Surah 532, which Muslims totally rip out of context. That's the passage they quote to say, what Islam teaches is that if anyone killed a man, it is as if he killed all mankind. You want to do anything to improve the knowledge about Islam in this world, read those two verses. Read Surah 532, 533. That verse actually says, so God ordained for the children of Israel, if anyone killed a man, except for making mischief in the land, right, or for murder, then it is as if he killed all mankind. Great. Lovely teaching for the children of Israel. Next verse. Next verse.
What about the Muslims?
Yes. The penalty for making war against Allah and against Muhammad and for making mischief in the land.
Which is what we're doing right now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Death, dismemberment, imprisonment, all kinds of things, right?
And we get death threats right here at
Crucifixion,
ABN
all kinds of
for
things.
speaking the truth
all
about
of
Islam.
these. Now think about this. From a Muslim perspective, is the United States making mischief in Muslim lands?
Absolutely.
Is Israel making mischief in Muslim lands?
Oh, yes.
Of course.
So are these acts of aggression against Islam?
Yes.
Do Muslims get to defend themselves by carrying out these penalties, which include death and dismemberment?
Absolutely.
So are acts of terrorism justified against the United States, against Israel?
And the Muslim
Absolutely. This is as clear as day from the Muslim sources. And guess what? That's just the defensive stage.
But every war is defensive in this ideology.
Absolutely,
really.
absolutely. Yeah. So think about this. Muslims, Islam promotes peace and tolerance. Look at Surah 109. To you be your religion, and to me be my religion. You look a little closer. You read something like Surah 5, which tells you, actually, anyone that messes around in a Muslim land, you carry out some brutal penalties. Yeah. That's stage 2. But that's not the end. You eventually get to stage 3, and this is where Muslims aren't, attacking some other nation or attacking someone else or attacking a place where they're in the minority and they're engaging in acts of terrorism. This is where Muslims form the majority. And as far as offensive jihad taking over, when Muslims form a majority, that's when Muslims adopt a full-blown Sharia. Everyone else has to be violently subjugated. Everyone else has to accept dhimmi status if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Sabian. Not a lot of Sabians around anymore. If you're a pagan, you have a different set of options. But if you look at this, you find this pattern in Muhammad's life. You find it in the Quran. You find it in the Hadith. You look around in the world today, and you could tell me a country in the world, and don't even tell me what country it is. Tell me the percentage of Muslims in the country. I will tell you what message Muslims are promoting in that country.
Absolutely.
I will tell you what message. Follow, and this is as clear as day. An idiot could figure this out. And if it's not clear enough, you can go, if you get the Darul Salam collection of Bukhari, they actually have an essay on this by Abu Humaid, the Chief Justice of Saudi Arabia, and the Imam at the Grand Mosque until he died.
Well, it follows the example
It has
of
an
Muhammad's
article
life.
on here where he says, these are the stages of jihad. When we're too weak to fight, we don't fight. Later on, we fight defensively. Eventually, we fight offensively. They spell it out for us. And in the Huffington Post, man, Muhammad is very similar to George Washington on hygiene. Why are you guys arguing about it?
I tell you, brothers, we've got a lot more callers, a lot more to hear from you, Mr. President, and Brother Robert, but we do need to take a short break. And so, dear callers, thank you for your patience. We are live, 248-416-1300, all night long. Praise God until, I believe, 11:30 Eastern. Call all your friends. Call your enemies. Call everybody you know. This is hot. We'll be right back after this short break. Praise the Lord, and welcome back to our program tonight, live here with, yes, Pastor Joseph, yours truly, Robert Spencer, and President George Washington. Would to God that he would be our active president today. Hey, we've got a lot more callers, and before we get to the end of the program, we do want to talk a bit about what are the fruits, the respective fruits of these men's ideologies. If they're so similar in their life and in their mannerisms and their teachings, then certainly the societies that they bequeath to the world should also be similar. We want to talk about that just a bit. Before we go any further, should we take another caller?
Absolutely.
Let's take another caller right now. You've been patiently waiting. Welcome, you're on the air with ABN. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Good evening.
Good evening, Pastor Joseph, David, Robert.
Manu.
How are you?
Good
Happy
evening.
New Year.
It's George.
Good evening, brother.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, our first president. How are you?
Thank you.
This is Brother Issa.
Huh?
Brother Issa, thank you so much for calling in. You have to be concise tonight. We don't have much time. Go right ahead.
I got you. I just want to wish you guys, I just want to greet you guys. May God bless you. Understand the position you guys are in. You guys are standing up in the front lines, and hypocrisy up at its utmost. Keep up the good work. Don't faint. You stay strong in the Lord. Remember, God is with you. Who could be against you? God blessing each and every one of you. Remember, you got a lot of following out there. You're opening people's eyes. You keep it up, and don't you dare faint. God bless you, and God keep you.
Thank you, dear Brother Issa. We love you, brother. Thank you for that blessing. Praise God. Excellent.
Good night.
And good night, brother. Thank you. All right, a regular caller on the News and Views program. That's wonderful. Why don't we go ahead and take one more caller while we're at it? Let's take the next caller right now. Welcome, you're on the air with ABN.
Yes, hello. How are you all doing this evening?
Well, thanks. Hope you are. Go right ahead with your question or comment.
I am. I want both of your participants on this panel this evening to know how much I really appreciate what they're doing for God. First of all, Robert, all of the books that you've authored, I've read a few of them, and they're just such a blessing to me and to those people that are around me. I shared the information that you write in these things, and it's just amazing how well you illuminate this issue that you guys discuss on the show.
Thank you very much.
And David, and first of all, let me go back to Robert. Robert,
Where is this David he keeps talking about? Go ahead.
I keep hearing good things of this, David.
David.
David George, whatever your name is tonight. But Robert, let me just tell you that I listen to the Radio Jihad Network frequently on blog on the I can't even remember the Blogspot Radio, and you two, when you guys get going back and forth with Steve, it just drives me absolutely insane how funny you guys can be. And then
very
David,
kind.
I want
Thank
to tell you, David, that your ministry with Nabil and what I've seen, what you guys have tried to do in Dearborn, is just, it motivates me to get out there and spread the word how dangerous this ideology is. Now, I'm a history teacher, which President Washington would probably be interested in this evening. I'm not exactly sure how well he can handle field a question just from out of the blue, but here it goes. David, if you were, I'm sorry, President Washington.
Yes, President Washington is waiting. Go right ahead.
Yes, if you were to describe your Valley Forge in this issue of Islamic encroachment into our society, what would your Valley Forge be?
Well, let me give you a slightly modified answer to a slightly modified question. You brought up the city of Dearborn. General Henry Dearborn. The city of Dearborn is named after General Henry Dearborn, who fought in the American Revolutionary War. Was a great patriot. Right? And now the city of Dearborn names their city after him and yet crumbles the rights that people fought for. And so that is the battle. That is the battle. People fought for rights, and go to any one of the founding fathers. They will tell you don't assume that you have these rights. Don't assume that these rights cannot be taken away from you. You have to be vigilant always to make sure that people do not take away the fundamental rights that people fought for. And we've lost that in the world today. People have lost that. They think, oh, I've got this, and I don't even have to pay any attention to what's going on around me because I'll be good to go. And that document over there, that document, the Bill of Rights, it says everything. And as long as that document is over there, then we're not going to have any problems. An absolute nonsense. Patriots fought for those rights. Patriots have to defend those rights.
Thank you, dear caller, and thank you, Mr. President. Indeed, Patriots died for those rights. And now we're beginning to fear that we're going to die in spite of those rights, trying to defend them, and they will soon be but a memory. Well, we have more callers. Shall we take perhaps one or two more, and then I want to get to this final stage where you all compare and contrast, if there's any contrast at all, to the fruits of George Washington's legacy along with Muhammad himself. So why don't we take one or two more callers and get to that. Let's take the next caller right now. Welcome, you're on the air with ABN. Hello, do we have a caller on the air?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead. You're on the air.
Okay, well, Brother Washington, you resemble a great deal of Brother David Wood. Did you happen to be in his genealogy?
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
he sounds like a handsome man.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
It's amazing how people will try to whitewash Muhammad and Islam today by comparing him to George Washington. I mean, wouldn't Muhammad be the kind of guy that George Washington would want to rebel against or get away from?
I should think so.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There is no more oppressive ideology in history than Islam. Part of the message of Islam, and this is what we would get to if we're talking about the fruits of the various views, part of the message of Islam is that God wants people to live and act and think like and dress like 7th century Arabs. And so you have to dress like a 7th century Arab would dress. You have to act, you have to think like that, and don't think outside the box, because if you do, Muhammad is going to chop off your head and put it right back inside the box where it belongs, according to Islam. Innovation in Islam, innovation, coming up with new things, new ideas to modify older ones, is one of the worst sins you can commit. You've got shirk and you've got innovation. And innovation, coming up with these new things, is actually a form of shirk because you're putting other things ahead of Islam. And so, absolutely, no question.
Brother, thank you so much for your call. We have to move on for time's sake. And here's a question for you, Brother Robert, as well as Mr. President. What would Muhammad have thought of President George Washington? I mean, if he was presented with George Washington, what would his moral judgment be on such a man?
Well, as we discussed before, Muhammad would have a very dim view of a man who set up a government that protected free inquiry. I mean, what the President was just saying just now about don't ask questions. This is reminds me of the Quran verse, chapter 5, verse 101, which says, do not ask about things which, if they were shown to you, would just trouble you. In other words, go along with what you're told. Don't ask questions. Don't stick your neck out. Don't get out of line. This is absolutely inimical to the Bill of Rights, to the First Amendment, to the Constitution, to the freedom of speech, which is enshrined as the First Amendment because it is the one on which all the others depend and on which all our freedoms depend, that Congress shall make no law infringing upon the freedom of religion or the establishing a religion or
Free exercise thereof.
Infringing upon the free exercise thereof, and establishing the freedom of speech, that there will be no law infringing upon the freedom of speech, which is now, as George has quite rightly pointed out, something that is gravely imperiled because free people do not realize just how much it is threatened and how much they have to act to protect it. It is not just because it is written down there that it's going to be safe and safeguard our freedoms forever. But Muhammad would take a very dim view of this. He didn't want people asking questions. He didn't want free inquiry. He did not want dissent. He ordered the killing of the poets, Ka'b ibn Ashraf, Asma bint Marwan, and others who mocked him, who made fun of him. That was their only crime, that they ridiculed him. But as Thomas More pointed out in the 16th century, the devil is a proud spirit who cannot endure to be mocked.
Right.
and neither could Muhammad.
Right.
And so when he was mocked, he couldn't endure it, and he asked his followers, who will kill Ka'b bin Ashraf for me? Who will kill Asma bin Marwan? And he rewarded the murderers. And he also, Muhammad bin Maslama, who killed Ka'b, he actually got permission from Muhammad to lie to him in order to deceive him, to enable him to get close enough to kill him. In line with Muhammad's own dictum, war is deceit. Muhammad would have contempt for George Washington and his honorable rules of warfare and his unwillingness to engage in that kind of tactic in order to defeat the British. He would have contempt for Washington's code of honor in general.
And his Christian religion would make him, I mean, if you were to bring Muhammad to the 18th century America.
I'm borderline Christian deist,
Well,
by the way.
No, I don't agree
I'm
with
kind
you,
of in between.
Mr. Washington.
All right.
I believe you are a devoted Christian.
You're getting that from
You need
David Bart.
It's true, too. It's true. It's absolutely true. Nevertheless, you would be a kafir. You would be...
Either way.
You would perhaps be a mushrik, worthy of death upon sight. Muhammad, actually, if he was true to what we understand from the Quran and the Sirah literature and the Hadith, he would seek to kill you or subjugate you at very sight. I mean, no doubt George Washington would be contemptible in Muhammad's eyes, even as Muhammad and Mohammedans were in George Washington's sight. The whole ridiculous myth that the only reason Muslims fight us is because we first fought them. I mean, how comical and yet, ironic and sad is it that the vast majority of the people of this nation have absolutely no clue what the first war this nation ever fought as an established nation was.
The Barbary pirates were actually conducting raids on American merchant ships and were demanding payment, demanding jizya essentially, for the unimpeded, for these ships to proceed on their routes unimpeded. And that gave rise to what became a very famous expression in early 19th century America: millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Because actually, after Washington, there was a move to pay tribute to these people.
And it was a huge proportion of our GDP, if you will. Yeah.
In order to get them to leave the ships alone. And then finally, the United States went to war with the Barbary pirates rather than continue to pay this tribute because it was considered a matter of honor that we would not submit. It's ironic nowadays that we're paying millions and billions of dollars to the government of Pakistan, to the government of Egypt, ostensibly so that they will fight terror. And it's been abundantly documented that the government of Pakistan takes that money and turns it over to the terrorists they're supposed to be fighting. And yet we still send them this money.
It's jizya payment.
Yes,
essentially.
it's tribute, and it is a grave dishonor to our forefathers who stood against the Barbary pirates.
Please
now we're
forgive us.
surrendering to their sons and heirs.
We do not support these methodologies of our current president. Please forgive us, Mr. President. And indeed, as you've highlighted, and it's been highlighted to David Barton and others who look at the founding history of the United States of America, when the Barbary Pirates ambassador in France was inquired from Benjamin Franklin and other American statesmen, I believe it was perhaps John Adams or someone else, who were sent over as a delegation to try to inquire as to the reasons for this hostility, which was against a nation that hadn't even been formed in the past, had no navy, no history of aggression. The answer was quite clear. Our prophet told us that we should fight everyone who's not a Muslim, and it's actually, I think, a quote of Surah, is it 49:5, until we cast a bond firmly upon them or let them go.
47:4.
47:4.
This is very important because the Quran teaches, and most Americans have no idea of this, of course, and they do think, well, they hate us because of our foreign policy, they hate us because we support Israel, they hate us for something that we've done in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're only just striking out. I mean, even Dinesh D'Souza...
It's your ads. It's your ads in New York.
Or my ads, or Pamela Geller's ads that have inflamed them, so that they are striking out. And Dinesh D'Souza said it's because of the manifest immorality of American pop culture, beamed into these straight-laced moral Muslim societies, that causes them to strike out. The Quran teaches that Muslims should wage war against and subjugate Jews and Christians and Sabians and whoever else it doesn't say if they are immoral. It doesn't say if they have a foreign policy to which you object. It doesn't have any qualifier.
Right.
It doesn't say the evil or wicked Jews and Christians, but leave the good ones alone.
No.
It's all of the Jews and the Christians. Fight against the people of the book and subjugate them. There are no exceptions.
Right.
There is nothing that we can do as unbelievers that will ultimately appease that imperative.
Unless we become Muslim.
Or submit.
Yeah.
And I have to point out, well, two things really. First,
President.
as kind of a side note,
Yes. You were a
How
Bible-believing Christian, by the way. But go ahead, President.
how ridiculous is it to think that Muslims spread all the way to Spain
Yes.
in the West,
Yes.
and all the way to India and Southeast Asia
Yes.
in the East by defense?
Oh, they just proclaimed
How
the
did you
message of Islam and
expand?
everyone
How did
just
Muhammad
accepted it.
expand from little Medina,
Oh.
from little Medina,
The beauty of Islam.
to form this massive empire
Everyone immediately submitted and accepted it.
by defense?
Yeah.
By defense.
Yeah, exactly.
And
A lot of football games are won just by the defense alone.
Absolutely.
No offense, didn't have to come on the field.
you don't need an offense. You don't need an offense. Your defense can keep scoring touchdowns if they keep taking the ball. They keep taking the ball.
That's the strategy we use, you know.
Coach Muhammad.
Hey,
No, he goes for the bomb.
yeah, the bomb is
Yeah,
right. The
yes.
bomb. Actually, it's the missile he tries to hit Satan with, but he can't. He got confused. He
And
Allah.
the,
we have one more caller. We have 8
the other
minutes.
thing I wanted to mention, one more quick thing, is this idea that it's all our faults, that we're doing various things
Yes.
to the Muslim world.
Especially greasy
What-
Islamophobes like
What,
Yes.
what experiences from unbelievers do Muslims have that no other group in the world has to face?
Could you repeat that, please?
Every group in the world has to face things from people that disagree with them.
Yes,
Muslims
certainly.
are the ones who
Right.
respond by killing and slaughtering and blowing up
Like
buildings.
spoiled brats. Absolutely.
now-
Well,
any-
you know
any
poverty
group
causes
can.
terrorism.
Yeah.
That's why there's so many Haitian suicide
What group
bombers.
is there that doesn't experience poverty?
Osama bin Laden, abject poverty before
Yes,
he became a
abject.
And
terrorist.
so,
Yeah.
and so the point I'm making is, if all of the political and social and other issues that Muslims face that aren't related to their religion are the same issues that everyone else faces, then the difference in how Muslims respond to these things must have some other basis.
Well, they're right.
Because
we're
everyone's
wrong, right?
facing the same issues in various places.
Yeah.
So if Muslims just by nature respond in a very different way, we have to say, what is it? And that is the question that no one is willing to ask. Why is it that Muslims respond to the same things everyone else responds to in a very different, far more violent way?
Brothers.
You know, you're right. You got my vote,
Amen.
President.
Amen.
Well, I may run
second
again.
that.
I may run again.
Please do. And you're vice president. You look a lot better than Biden, you know.
I'll have the hair
But I
plucked.
want to keep my gun, please. We have one more caller, but before we get to him, we're basically out of time. We wanted to spend more time on this, but I want to ask each of you to give me one main thing here. Muhammad and George Washington supposed to be just exactly the same, kindred spirits, according to the Huffington Post. If so, the fruits of their ideologies should be identical. Can both of you just take a moment and point out one particular issue which either proves the Huffington Post correct or exposes their dissimulation? Brother Robert, would you like to go first?
Sure. Very briefly, really, George Washington is the founding figure of the greatest republic that the world has ever known,
Amen.
the freest society, up until recently, a place where the human spirit could flower in a way that it had never had the freedom to do in the history of the world, to the extent that it has had in the United States, with free elections, without coups d'etats, without authoritarian interregnums, but with a genuine public square that enabled dissent, respectable, loyal, responsible dissent, to be heard, and allowed people to make rational decisions about what their leadership should be. This is a very rare thing in human history.
But now isn't that the same fruit of Islam?
Well, no, Islam has never had a democratic tradition. It's always been given to authoritarian governments in imitation of Muhammad's authoritarian rule over the first Muslims. And so you've got a very different situation. There is only one, arguably, only one republic that had anything like that kind of a free society, and that was Turkey, which really only had it in the major cities, and only had it in the context of a war with Islam. Kemal Ataturk established many restrictions upon the practice of Islam, and sharply restricted the dissemination of political Islam, even forbidding the imams in the mosques on Fridays to preach their own sermons. They would get sermons from the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Ankara that never spoke about political Islam. Turkey was not a Muslim state up until recently. It was a secular state that restricted Islam. There has never been an Islamic democracy. And nowadays you're a greasy Islamophobe if you say democracy and Islam are incompatible. But democracy and Islam have never been compatible.
Amen.
They have never gone together in the history of the world.
Yeah. Wherever Islam flourishes, democracy shrinks. Wherever democracy it begins to encroach, Islam, or vice versa.
And this is really the main difference of why I am not similar to Muhammad. Our ideologies are diametrically opposed. If you look at what we did when we put together this country, we looked to the past. We looked to past nations. We looked to past philosophers. We looked to past politicians. And we said what worked and what didn't work. The things that worked, we want to make part of our country. And we want to make a government that allows us to recognize future problems and to deal with those and to modify things and to continue to grow. And this is what made us great. This allowed us to prosper. This allowed Western civilization to blossom. And we influenced so many other nations, and they have been blessed as well. We look to Islam. We don't look to the past to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. We look to the revelations given by this one man, Muhammad. And whatever he says, that's the way it is. And if you disagree with it, you have to die.
Right.
And we look at what has happened to Muslim civilization blossom for a short while when they were conquering other nations who had all of this science and learning, blossomed for a short time, but once they ran into a wall in Europe and into another wall in India, you saw the society decline. And now, who wants to move to the Muslim world? Who wants to say, hey, I want to go there? So I just have to say, diametrically opposed ideologies. If you want to compare me to someone, right? We fought for the view that all men are created equal, not according to the Quran, where Surah 310 says that Muslims are the best of peoples. We fought for the claim that all men are created equal and that we have these inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Islam does not allow that, except within an Islamic framework that absolutely crushes it. And so if you want to compare me to someone who shares my values. Don't compare me to Muhammad. Compare me to Pastor Joseph. Compare me to Robert
Jesus
Spencer.
Christ,
compare me to this David Wood I've been hearing so much about. And I'll say it, I would be honored if everyone would compare me to one of the greatest patriots of all time in American history, Pamela Geller. But whatever you do, don't compare me to Muhammad.
And here we go. Love thy neighbor, right at the heart of the American tradition. Islam, kill thy neighbor, unless, of course, they are a Muslim. And then, of course, that's conditional. And we see that even today. Brothers, thank you so much. We're out of time. Dear callers, call back in a little while. We're going to have another program starting in about half an hour. We're going to be talking about my jihad. Robert Spencer has a jihad. Is it to lose weight? Is that right?
Yes, to stay fit, get in my exercise despite my busy schedule.
That's your jihad.
That's my jihad.
What is jihad, by the way? We're going to talk about that. And much more. Hey, call everyone. This is big. 248-416-1300. I'm looking forward to it. I know you are as well. We'll be right back live here at ABN in just about 1/2 hour.